1 minute ago, Pam Bondi turned a talk show into a courtroom and destroyed Robert Dairo. The air inside the Fox News studio wasn't just tense, it was weaponized. Expectation buzzed under the surface like a live wire. This wasn't going to be a segment. It was going to be a skirmish. On one side, Robert Dairo, the Hollywood icon turned political firebrand, praised by critics, feared by his opponents. On the other, Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General whose quiet discipline had long been underestimated, until tonight. Producers knew what they were doing. The stage was polished, lit to perfection, and segmented into ideological fault lines. One half of the audience gleamed in MAGA red, the other stewed in liberal skepticism. This was no debate, it was a televised tribunal, and the crowd was the jury. Hannity opened the segment with practiced calm. Tonight, he said, we bring two forces into direct collision. Robert Dairo, Pam Bondi. No scripts, no filters. Robert stepped up first. The applause was thunderous. He soaked it in the image of controlled gravitas. He didn't open with bombast. He opened with silence, letting it stretch, letting the moment ripen. Then he dropped the hammer. This country rewards those who defend power, not truth. He never mentioned names, he didn't have to. The tension in the room snapped taut. Each sentence landed like a nail in a coffin not yet closed. He spoke of morality corrupted by media, of leaders replaced by performers of loyalty sold as virtue. But his message wasn't just political, it was personal. I've watched people who once stood for law twist it to fit a man, he said. And Pam Bondi, she's the face of that betrayal. The crowd stirred. Applause from the left, boos from the right. Hannity leaned forward but said nothing. Dairo wasn't finished. She's not defending justice, he said. She's protecting a collapsing empire. And for what? For proximity to a man who rewrites the Constitution with his thumbs. Then came the signature line, she used to be a prosecutor. Now she's a prop. The left roared. The right seethed. And in the wings behind the curtain, Pam Bondi stood still. Watching, listening, calculating. Her aide, Rachel, murmured, "He's calling you a puppet now." Pam didn't blink. "He's not talking to me. He's talking to the mirror." She turned toward the tech team, her voice low, unwavering. "Pull the 2016 clip. The one where he praised Obama. Full segment, no fade in." Rachel hesitated. "You sure?" Pam nodded. "He thinks this is a monologue. He forgot what happens when someone cross-examines the script." The studio was shifting, the energy tightening, phones were lifted, live streams running. Pam Bondi stepped forward into the light. There was no entrance music, no applause cue, only silence. But in silence, some voices echo louder. She faced the crowd, not smiling, not posturing. Her gaze was sharp, her posture exact. She didn't begin with defense, she began with dissection. "You've made accusations tonight," she said, "and I won't match you line for line. I'll meet you with evidence." She raised a hand. The screen behind her flickered to life. Robert Dairo, CNN, 2016. Obama is a visionary. Measured, clear, a real leader. Gasps in the crowd, phones out. The narrative cracked. Pam turned back, her voice razor-edged. That was Robert in 2016. Tonight he condemned another president for not fitting his favorite script. So I ask, who changed? Dairo stiffened in his seat. Pam didn't look at him, she looked at the crowd. "You call me a puppet," she said, "but I've stood across from cartel leaders, traffickers, corporate frauds, and I've never flinched. Because justice doesn't shift with trending hashtags. It stands even when it's unpopular. Silence, heavy, intact. Then the line, the one rehearsed only in truth, not in style. "You brought a monologue, Mr. Dairo," she said. "I brought the record." The audience didn't cheer. Not yet, they were still processing. Still recalibrating, because when a myth cracks, it doesn't shatter in noise. It collapses in clarity. And the collapse had begun. The broadcast didn't cut to commercial. It couldn't. Not now. Something irreversible had happened and the producers knew it. In the control room, the decision was unanimous: stay live. Let it burn. Let America watch. Pam Bondi didn't return to her seat. She remained standing, her arms at her sides, her face unreadable. She wasn't looking for applause. She was waiting for Robert Dairo to respond not with fire but with facts. The trap had been set. Now she was daring him to walk into it. Dairo took a long sip of water, then leaned forward, trying to regain tempo. But the gravity in the room had shifted. His voice still carried, but it didn't command. He tried levity, he tried philosophy. But every word now competed with the image that had just played on screen. His praise of Obama, his praise of leadership, his praise of the very idea of balance and reason. Pam hadn't attacked his politics. She'd indicted his memory. This wasn't about Democrats versus Republicans anymore. It was about coherence, integrity, continuity. So when Dairo finally found a thread, it wasn't one that helped him. "That clip is nearly 10 years old," he said, half smiling. "People evolve." Pam's reply was instant. Evolve or dissolve. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Hannity let the moment breathe. For once, he wasn't moderating. He was spectating. Robert raised his hand, signaling for calm, for grace, for understanding. "I care about truth," he said. "I speak out when I see abuse, and what we're seeing now under this administration is a dismantling of our institutions. That's not theater, that's survival." Pam nodded slowly. "Then let's talk about survival." The control room switched camera angles tight on Bondi's face. The script in her head had changed gears. This wasn't just a rebuttal. It was an indictment. She listed it calmly. "Survival is what the single mother in Tampa seeks when her business gets crushed by lockdowns while celebrities hold private galas. Survival is what border agents plead for when fentanyl surges across a border you mock but never patrol. Survival is what the families of homicide victims pray for, while politicians like your friends in Hollywood campaign to defund the very institutions meant to protect them." Robert shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted toward the crowd. The applause he expected from his side wasn't there. Not yet. Not anymore. Pam didn't relent. "You say I serve a collapsing empire," she said, "but I've served victims, prosecuted predators. And while you sip champagne at charity galas, I've held hands with parents identifying their child's body. It wasn't anger. It was something heavier, earnest, lived, a courtroom clarity that didn't need volume, only precision." "You want to moralize," she continued. "Then explain this. When did you start assigning virtue based on who shouts the loudest on Twitter?" Dairo opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words were forming but not flowing. Pam stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to erase the distance between performance and principle. "You've spent years convincing America that you're righteous, but righteousness without responsibility is just theater. And you," she said, "have made a career of curtain calls." Now the crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in clarity. Even the liberal-leaning side was shifting. Phones that once streamed Robert were now locked onto Pam. In the control room, a producer whispered, "This is a collapse. He's unraveling." Pam turned away from him just slightly, enough to signal that the debate was done, not by vote, but by verdict. But it was Robert Dairo who spoke again, his voice thinner than before. "You speak like you're pure," he said, "but you stood by Trump. You defended him." "What does that make you?" Pam stopped, tilted her head, then answered with the calm of a woman who had waited her whole life for that exact question. "It makes me consistent." No crowd roar followed, just silence. Respectful, final. The host moved to intervene to change topics, but Bondi raised her hand once more. "I'm not here to win arguments," she said. "I'm here to remind people that truth isn't a trend, and courage isn't performance." Dairo looked at her not with rage, but with something far worse, recognition. That he'd underestimated her, that he'd walked into a battle he thought he'd stage managed only to find himself outscripted by reality. Pam took her seat without fanfare. Rachel didn't whisper anything. She didn't have to. The entire room had already heard it loud and clear. Robert Dairo, the icon, the activist, the man who once shaped culture with a sentence, had finally met someone whose silence could do more damage than his entire speech. The reckoning was not televised. It was lived. And it was only just beginning. The show's closing credits hadn't even rolled when the first hashtag appeared. Bajat Bondi Effect? Within 20 minutes, it was trending across 3 continents. Memes exploded. Some cast Robert Dairo's expression in grainy black and white, the word outplayed stamped in red. Others looped Pam's single phrase, "I brought the record," into TikTok's reaction videos and remix culture. Cable news scrambled, panels convened, Pundits dissected every word, every pause, every tilt of the head. Conservative outlets hailed Bondi as the steel spine of the right. Liberal ones called Dairo's performance unexpectedly hollow. What none of them could deny a shift had occurred. And it was seismic. In a suite overlooking Manhattan, Dairo's team had gone dark. No post-interview, no statement, just silence. His publicist stared blankly at a muted screen looping the clip where Bondi held court. His agent, once bullish on his transition to politics, checked the polling feed, then closed it without a word. Inside the studio, Bondi didn't linger. She shook Hannity's hand, nodded at the crew, and walked straight out into the night air. No cameras, no entourage, just Rachel trailing behind silent until they reached the car. "You didn't have to go that hard," Rachel said. Pam slid into the passenger seat. "I didn't. I had to go that real." They drove in silence. Headlines buzzed through, car radio static. Commentators wrestled with new narratives. Was this a revival of principled conservatism? Was it a warning shot to celebrity activism? Or was it something more primal, the return of fact over flair? The next morning, newspapers ran contrasting headlines. The New York Times, Bondi breaks through. The Daily Wire, Pam, the prosecutor returns. Variety tried damage control with Dairo, misread the moment. Meanwhile, Bondi received an unexpected message request on her encrypted account. No name, just an attachment, a video. She opened it. It was from a young woman in Houston, a mother. The background was dimly lit, her child asleep in a cot behind her. "Ms. Bondi," the woman began, voice cracking, "I never cared much for politics, but last night you spoke for people like me. I'm just tired of being looked at like we don't count. You didn't shout, you didn't gloat, you just stood. And that gave me something I didn't know I needed." Pam paused the clip. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't smile. She didn't tear up. She simply absorbed it. By midday, Bondi's office had to issue a public statement declining TV interviews for the week. Requests had surged from every major network. The BBC wanted a feature. The View wanted her at the table. Even NPR asked for a sit-down. She declined them all. That choice again was calculated. Let the silence do the talking. But silence didn't mean inaction. While Dairo's image manager scrambled to arrange an apology tour, Bondi was already in motion. She convened with her legal advisory group. A plan was forming, one that moved beyond rhetoric, one rooted in statute, precedent, and policy. If part 1 had been the strike and part 2 the collapse, part 3 was the blueprint. Bondi wasn't just reclaiming narrative ground, she was preparing to legislate from it. Behind the scenes, digital media strategists noticed something unusual. Bondi's approval rating among independents, especially women, jumped 14 points overnight. Not because she invoked culture, but because she invoked competence. The left couldn't figure out how to frame her. Too calm to be dismissed as angry. Too composed to be labeled unhinged. Too credentialed to be written off as a mouthpiece. The right, meanwhile, found themselves realigning. Not out of obligation, but out of admiration. At a fundraiser in Miami, one congressman whispered to another, "She just did more for our base in 8 minutes than we've done all year." And Dairo, his team released a statement. Carefully worded, it praised healthy discourse, thanked supporters for their courage, and reaffirmed his commitment to justice. It didn't land. The public didn't want a recap. They wanted accountability. And Dairo, for the first time in his career, had none to offer. In private, he fumed. "They're acting like she exposed some scandal." "All she did was quote me," he said. "Yes," his advisor replied quietly. "Exactly." He threw the phone. Elsewhere, a clip of Bondi's calm stare played on loop in waiting rooms, newsrooms, and classrooms. She hadn't raised her voice, but she had raised the standard, and America unexpectedly noticed. Robert Dairo hadn't slept. Not really. He paced his penthouse floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting a skyline that felt more distant than ever. The man once known for dictating the narrative now couldn't control his own. He wasn't used to losing, not on camera, not in the court of public opinion, not like this. His team assembled at dawn, a war room of stylists, PR consultants, crisis managers, and one increasingly quiet strategist. They cycled through damage control options, an apology interview, a charity visit, a speech at a university. Dairo dismissed each with growing impatience. "You don't recover from silence with noise," he muttered. Still, he couldn't sit idle. That afternoon, he appeared unannounced on a left-leaning podcast. Casual setting, intimate format, just him, a microphone, and the faint hope of reasserting relevance. But even the host looked hesitant, unsure if he was interviewing a guest or a ghost of relevance past. "I think America saw something different that night," Dairo began. "They saw a narrative clash. And in that kind of moment, it's easy to be misunderstood, but clarity wasn't his enemy. Pam Bondi was, because she had been crystal clear." As Dairo stumbled through softened self-justifications, the clip from the Fox News debate continued its viral march. College students quoted it in seminars. Veterans reposted it with captions like, "Finally someone who speaks without spin." Even some journalists who had long criticized Bondi began reevaluating her presence. But the real shift wasn't online. It was on Capitol Hill. Bondi's name came up in 3 separate committee meetings, none of which she attended. Lawmakers were quoting her directly in arguments over digital surveillance reform and border security funding. Her words had transcended the moment. They had entered policy. At a private strategy session in D.C., Senator Thompson from Texas leaned over to a senior advisor. "We need her in the room next quarter. If she doesn't want to run, then she needs to write the damn bill." Meanwhile, Pam Bondi wasn't resting either. She'd returned to Florida and resumed quiet meetings with state legal scholars and former federal judges. She wasn't planning a media tour. She was constructing a legal framework, something that could be proposed as a bipartisan reform package, rooted in fairness, sharpened by the lessons of performance politics. Rachel watched her work late into the night, surrounded by books, folders, and yellow legal pads. "You're not writing the moment," Rachel said. "You're converting it." Pam didn't look up. Moments are loud. Laws last longer. In private correspondence with several women's advocacy groups, Bondi pledged support for a new bill that addressed coercive control, an issue rarely litigated but devastating in scope. Victims weren't always bruised. Some were just broken slowly, quietly, legally. The groups responded within hours. "Yes, let's draft it." Meanwhile, Robert Dairo tried one last tactic. He announced a televised town hall in Los Angeles. His theme, "Restoring Truth," reclaiming justice. But truth by then had found a new custodian. The town hall aired on a Thursday night. Viewership started strong, but 15 minutes in it began to dip. Half an hour later, Bondi's interview with a little-known military podcast, one she'd recorded quietly days prior, went live. No makeup, no production team, just a former soldier and a former prosecutor talking about chain of command abuse of power and how some battles don't need bullets, just integrity. Within 6 hours, it outpaced Dairo's event in shares engagement and trust metrics. It wasn't just that Bondi had won the exchange, she'd rewritten the format. America wasn't watching fireworks anymore. They were watching foundations being rebuilt. 2 weeks after the televised debate, a storm was quietly brewing in the Capitol. Not in headlines, but in backdoor briefings. Not in TikToks or tweets, but in drafted memos and internal committee schedules. For the first time in years, both political aisles were murmuring a name with the same tone, not as opposition, not as ally, but as force. Pam Bondi. She had not appeared on television since the night of the confrontation. Her social media remained inactive. Her statements when issued were policy-centered, devoid of sentiment or spin. The absence was deliberate. It created not distance, but demand. Inside a Senate policy chamber, a bipartisan working group had assembled. 3 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and an independent delegate from Arizona. The bill on the table was still in draft form, tentatively titled the Coercive Control Accountability Act, but its author was not present. She didn't need to be. Her language was all over it. The language around behavioral intimidation is hers, a Republican staffer whispered. And the exemption clauses on financial entrapment that was her draft too, a Democrat replied. Even critics had to concede the clarity was surgical. As the bill advanced through preliminary rounds, Bondi remained in Florida, holding closed-door roundtables with law enforcement officials, victims' advocacy organizations, and even a few disillusioned former Dairo supporters. Her goal wasn't punishment. It was construction, framework, reform. Meanwhile, Dairo's sphere continued to shrink. After the failed town hall and an awkward appearance on a late-night comedy show that earned more mockery than support, he began to retreat. Rumors of canceled appearances and stalled Netflix deals began to surface. The activist-turned-celebrity narrative had curdled. His brand was no longer defiance, it was detachment. Privately, he blamed Bondi. She changed the game, he said in a leaked audio clip. I was building an audience, she built an argument. That clip, too, went viral. But the convergence wasn't just rhetorical, it was structural. 2 weeks later, the bill, now renamed the Federal Integrity and Power Act, passed subcommittee unanimously. Its momentum shocked the press. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't polarizing. It was written like a legal brief, not a stump speech, but that's what made it work. And then came the hearing. Pam Bondi entered the hearing room not as a witness, not as a pundit, but as an architect. She took her seat at the long table before the Senate Judiciary Committee. No entourage, no publicist, just a thick binder and the quiet precision of someone who knew every comma she'd written. She wasn't sworn in for testimony she had asked not to be. I'm not here to testify, she told the chair. I'm here to clarify. And clarify she did. For over 90 minutes, Bondi fielded questions from lawmakers across the aisle. Her responses were measured, grounded in precedent, and devoid of emotional excess. Even her fiercest political adversaries couldn't land a meaningful blow. Her answers weren't evasive. They were built like court rulings, tight, deliberate, irrefutable. The room, usually a theater of posturing, had turned into a classroom. Midway through the hearing, Senator DeMarco, a known partisan pit bull, tried to trap her in contradiction. You claim to stand against systemic abuse, but you supported an administration many accuse of that very thing. How do you reconcile that Ms. Bondi? Pam didn't flinch. I reconcile it by action, not association. I've prosecuted abusers from both parties. What matters isn't who I've stood beside, it's who I've stood against, and how. Even DeMarco paused. When the hearing ended, the chamber did not erupt into applause. It simply emptied, slowly, staffers and senators alike quietly nodding, exchanging glances that carried a single unspoken admission. She's real. That night, Dairo released a video statement from his Malibu residence. The lighting was dramatic, the tone somber. I believe in justice, but I also believe in growth. And I want to thank everyone who continues to believe in my mission. The comments section was brutal. She moved on. Why haven't you? You're talking. She's doing? Sit this one out, Robert. Meanwhile, Bondi boarded a late flight back to Florida, declining interviews at the airport. A journalist called out, Ms. Bondi, will you run for office? She didn't stop. But as she passed, she answered, I'm already running something. In early spring, the Federal Integrity and Power Act passed both chambers of Congress with a margin no pundit had predicted. 87 votes in the Senate, 315 in the House, red states, blue states, swing states. The message was not just bipartisan, it was generational. The signing ceremony was modest. No celebrity choirs, no grand backdrops. Just a plain wooden table in the Rose Garden and a president with pen in hand. And next to him, Pam Bondi. Not in heels, not in media makeup. Just a black suit and a steel expression. Cameras flashed, but she didn't smile. Not until the president handed her the signed copy and quietly said, You changed the tempo. She nodded. That was all. The clip traveled. Not viral, but deep. Political science classrooms, law schools, advocacy workshops. They didn't replay it for drama. They played it for blueprint. Pam didn't stick around for interviews afterward. She returned to Florida that same evening. Her inbox was full international inquiries, invitations to lead reform summits, even speaking offers from institutions that had once dismissed her. She declined most. Instead, she launched a working group. Its mission scale the act state by state, beginning with the ones most hostile to reform. She wasn't building momentum anymore. She was institutionalizing it. The strategy wasn't flashy, it was meticulous. Each target state was treated like a case file. Local jurisdictions were mapped. Opposition forces were researched. Legal ambiguities were preemptively addressed. Bondi wasn't running a campaign, she was running a prosecution. Meanwhile, Robert Dairo appeared on a panel in New York, not to challenge policy, not to defend legacy, but to present a documentary on the media's role in shaping heroes and villains. When asked directly about Bondi, he paused. She played it differently, he said, and she won. He didn't say it bitterly. He said it like someone who had seen a machine he once mastered recalibrate before his eyes. His last book deal was delayed indefinitely. His political pack disbanded. And while a loyal base remained, it had thinned. No longer raucous, just reflective. And that perhaps was the quietest revolution of all. The drama had exhausted the public, the performance politics, the monologues, the viral indignation. Pam Bondi hadn't just outmaneuvered a rival, she had introduced a different cadence. Slower, firmer, built not on outrage, but outcome. A month after the act became law, the first state followed suit. Then 3 more. By summer 11, states had adopted localized versions, and with each implementation, victims who had never qualified for protection before now had legal standing. For the first time. In a modest courtroom in Missouri, a woman testified under the new statute. Her voice shook. Her attorney cited Bondi's federal language directly. "We are not criminalizing conflict," the attorney said. "We are criminalizing coercion." The judge ruled in her favor. Word spread fast. Bondi issued no press release, but a memo went out to her working group revised training protocols for rural legal offices. Ensure comprehension. No state left behind. In one of those rural offices in Kentucky, a junior prosecutor who had once interned under Bondi wrote in her case notes, "For the first time, I feel like the law is catching up with reality." She was no longer a guest on panels. She was the standard they measured against, and as the next election cycle neared, something shifted in the questions being asked of candidates. Not just who they endorsed, but what they authored, what they had built, what endured beyond applause. Pam Bondi had no plans to run, but in a town hall in Tallahassee, when asked if she'd ever reconsider, she paused for the first time. "If leadership is needed," she said, "I've never waited for a title to lead." Later that night, in a small kitchen in Jacksonville, a mother of 3 watched the clip on her phone. She whispered to her daughter, "That's what a woman looks like when she remembers who she is." Bondi didn't tweet the quote, but it was taped to her office door the next morning. The quote spread beyond the building. It appeared on posters in civic centers, inside staff lounges at law firms, and eventually etched into a mural on a college campus wall. Beneath it, a simple hashtag, Staffaciari permanent. Even her political opponents were forced to recalibrate their tone. No longer able to dismiss her as partisan, they began asking her for feedback on new draft legislation ranging from judicial ethics reform to transparency clauses in executive budgeting. She reviewed each one with a red pen. At a press dinner in Washington, a columnist leaned over and whispered, "She's not a politician. She's the conscience we didn't know we needed." In response, a former White House aide murmured, "She doesn't campaign. She convicts." And maybe in the end, that was the point. She didn't win the war with slogans or spectacles. She didn't shout louder. She just outlasted the noise. She didn't go viral. She went permanent.